Hi everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be getting into episodes 674 through 676, which will cover manga chapters 740 through 742. And it is do or die time for Usopp as he must face down both Treble and Sugar for the fate of Dressrosa. So, synopsis. With everyone else struggling against the Don Quixote family, it's all up to Usopp to somehow take down Treble and Sugar. Meanwhile, we also get to see the backstory of the legendary Corrida Gladiator and toy soldier Kyros. Alright, so differences. So there are a few of them here. There is an extra scene where Frankie is fighting Dellinger and the Marines. The manga only shows from the point when Frankie begins his little speech, but we actually get to see a little bit more of the fight that happens prior to this. Another change that was added was the anime adds an extra scene where Viola sees what's happening down in the factory and becomes aware of how dire it is down there. But Luffy has this great moment where he's willing to wait because she confirms that Usopp is still down there fighting. And so Luffy has this moment that he trusts Usopp down there that he will come through. And that's not actually in the manga. And I actually really like this scene because, again, it's not something we don't already know, but it's just nice to see how much faith Luffy has in his crew. The anime also includes a couple scenes of Kyros struggling with his guilt and having nightmares during his flashback. The anime, another change that they made during the flashback is the anime for some reason leaves out the fact about Kyros that really puts his strength into kind of context of just how strong he actually is. So in the manga, it's mentioned how Kyros beat many warriors from overseas who came to actually fight him, as well as he's beaten giants and fish people, further showing that Kyros wasn't just strong in terms of the Dressrosa people, but on a more worldly scale. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in the actual episode. Additionally, the anime shows Kyros at the gates of the palace being met by Monet that fateful night, as well as Viola and the other executives. And then we also get to see Kyros getting ambushed and having the shackles put on his leg, while in the manga, it immediately cuts to him already in front of Doflamingo with the shackles already on, and it's not clear how that happened. And so this is, I think, is another good addition, even though it is technically filler. That's not, I don't know. I would say it is canon. I mean, because we don't really know how he got those shackles on there, and this actually now shows why someone that strong was able to be shackled. The last change that we see is they actually show a bit more of Usopp fighting against Treble. While in the manga, it was completely off-screen while it was showing the toys kind of like praying for Usopp to come out victorious among that conflict. So that'll do it for the differences, so let's get into the episodes themselves. And last we left off, the unthinkable has happened. Robin has been transformed into a toy and has been forgotten by everyone, including her nakama, which is an insane idea. It's really sobering to hear Robin actually kind of panicked. Well, for her level anyways. She realizes how bad this is and is now desperately hoping for Usopp to come through. And this always brought up a thought in my mind about what exactly they forgot in regards to a person, and Robin specifically. Of course, they forgot the person, but do they forget the events that happened surrounding that person? I ask because Robin's existence is a pretty massive part of Usopp's character development, as the events of the Enies Lobby and Water 7 were centered around Robin being taken and subsequently rescued, but that whole arc was one of the bigger catalysts for Usopp's biggest character growth moment of him realizing that he has value as a Straw Hat member and was an integral part of rescuing Robin. So does he lose some of that character growth because he probably remembers events like shooting the world government flag, taking down Spandam on the bridge, and yelling, at Luffy to get back up as he's facing Lucci. He doesn't know why he did any of those things and thus kind of loses maybe the meaning or the significance of that. And it's never really made clear, and I think it never will be. You're kind of left up to your own imagination as to like how this actually affected Usopp, because Oda doesn't actually come out and say it, nor does he clearly mention it. I like to think that it did kind of have an effect on him, but I like seeing the fact that Usopp still is a very courageous person in the end. He may have been a complete coward and an annoying level of coward up to this point. But yeah, I mean, along those lines would be, if Oda actually leaned into this, and so if he just made a slight tweak to Usopp and Dressrosa, it would have been so much better. So my idea is you can still have Usopp be nervous and scared like he always is, but maybe rein in his more selfish actions that he makes during this arc, but just not have him say much. That would be better. That way it doesn't make him seem like such a jerk. But when Robin does get turned and he loses those memories, then he reverts back to his sort of baser instincts. And that's what causes his incredibly selfish turn. And then you can have him, kind of abandon the Tontara and do all that stuff because he's lost all that growth he experienced while adventuring with Robin. But then, even without those memories, he still decides to turn back and help because Usopp in the end is a great guy and a hero. Or hell, this might have been an awesome moment to somehow bring Sogeking back for one last hurrah to give him the needed courage to face Trouble and Sugar. And honestly, I thought that was kind of the point of pairing him up with Robin in the first place when all of this started to go down, but none of that seemed to materialize, and instead Usopp is just kind of an insufferable selfish coward to a cruel degree. And I think that's my biggest issue with Usopp in Dressrosa, at least up to this point. Compared to any arc, Usopp is always selfish and a coward, and I never disliked that in and of itself. As you know from listening to this podcast, like I'm a huge fan of Usopp and I'm a huge defender for most part, but in this arc, Oda for some reason introduced this incredibly cruel aspect to Usopp's cowardice. He misleads the Tontara into giving them false hope, making them feel like they can take on Doflamingo, and putting their literal lives on the line, while Usopp just treats this whole situation kind of flippantly, just saying, screw the Tontara, I'm gonna bail the first chance I get. It just seems uncharacteristically mean-spirited and cruel for Usopp. I know what Oda was going for, and to an extent it kind of worked. He essentially created an overwhelmingly desperate situation that when the release finally happens, it is definitely quite the event, but I just don't think it should have been at the cost of essentially regressing Usopp to a point we haven't seen since he was introduced. It becomes so hard to like Usopp when he's running away and all the Tontara are chanting Usoland's name, even while being wounded on the ground. And the hope that they have in him feels so betrayed, and it's hard to forgive Usopp for abandoning them and even betraying their faith. It is especially hard to defend when Treble starts to really break their spirit, telling them that they'd been tricked and that whoever this Usoland was, he wasn't coming back, and that he lied to them. But Leo, on the other hand, has an incredible heart and he just stands and still believes in Usoland. That is a great leader, and at this point, I was kind of fully on board with Leo potentially becoming a Straw Hat. And one change about this scene I feel like they soften in the anime is that when Treble steps on Leo and the other Tontara after his impassioned speech, the anime makes it seem he slowly steps on him. But in the manga, based on the little explosion effect, it seems like he stamps on him with his foot. Like he just comes down on him a lot harder. And it's it's pretty brutal, I feel like. And the way Usopp has acted and behaved has been nothing short of reprehensible, especially seeing the Tontara all broken once he reveals who he is. But in the end, hearing all the Tontara suffering, he finally turns back to face Sugar and Treble, and he finally comes clean to everyone that he's been lying and revealing who he actually is, that he's actually a pirate in the Straw Hat Pirate crew, and his real name is Usopp. And just when you think Usopp can't sink any lower, Oda finally begins to work his magic and turns it around in epic fashion, as Usopp finally returns to who he is by coming through. Despite how scared he is, he declares that he may not be the legendary hero Usoland, but instead he's a pirate, and he's Usopp. And let me tell you, when he says that part about the fact that he may have been lying about being the hero Usoland, that from here on out, he's going to create a new hero legend of Usopp, of Captain Usopp. And that made me so happy to see that Usopp was finally back. Now, it still doesn't really excuse what he had done till now. I was very glad and hopeful that from here, Oda would redeem Usopp in a huge way. And one thing I really liked about this is that it goes back to the core of the lesson that Sanji imparted to him on Enies Lobby when he was doubting himself. There are things that he can't do, but then there are also things that only he can do. And getting at the idea that the reason Usopp is so valuable is because he is him. And here, finally, he relearns that lesson. Instead of being this made-up hero that he isn't, one that comes from legendary lineage that has the strength to free whole societies and take down sea kings, He needs to be who he is, and that's Usopp, the sniper of the Straw Hat pirate crew, that he himself is a legend and a hero already. He just doesn't recognize it, and that's a big thing for Usopp, is he's never, his confidence, like, he is pretty amazing. It's just that he just does not believe in himself. He's not the hero Usolan, but he's someone even greater. He's Captain Usopp. This moment was so amazing to see Usopp finally back to who he is. Also, the move he uses to open up on Treble, the Green Star Platinus Shuriken, is very reminiscent of the Shuriken Yuseigun, aka the Shuriken Meteor Swarm attack that he used on Luffy during the epic battle on Water 7. Unfortunately, Treble can reform himself back together, making the Beta Beto no Mi kind of a Logia fruit, it seems like. And this is really bad because I don't know how Usopp is going to beat Sugar and a Logia fruit user. But the story leaves on this massive cliffhanger and takes a really awkward detour in a flashback for Kyros and his backstory. And I have to admit, this is really jarring and is just kind of really poorly timed. That kind of kills the momentum in the story. And given the pretty bad pacing already in Dressrosa, even in the manga, and especially the atrocious pacing in the anime, this is really ill-timed for a lot of reasons. But Oda kind of wrote himself into a corner to have to do it this way because he wanted to preserve the twist that the toy soldier was Kyros for as long as possible, but he needed to have his backstory revealed before he turned back into a human, so the impact that can be felt can be really, felt this way. And so this was virtually the only moment he had to actually be able to insert this. Now, that's not to say that this flashback is bad. It's actually pretty good. But in any case, this flashback begins with seeing Kyros as a 15-year-old boy who is seen as a thug and hooligan in the country, which is a trope that Oda will continue to use in later arcs, interestingly enough, now that I've seen this in hindsight. And this boy gets taken in by King Riku and is allowed to fight in the Corrida Colosseum. But unlike Doflamingo's version, it's not a battle royale murder fest. It's a proper fight and not to the death. And the attitude of the crowd is even different, as you can hear them say that a person with Kyros' history of murder has no place in such a sacred place, which is a far cry from the modern day crowd where Doflamingo has conditioned them to be bloodthirsty. And the reverse parallels between Kyros and Rebecca's experiences in the ring are also very obvious, with the crowd jeering him for being a murderer, while in the present, the crowd jeers Rebecca for being unwilling to kill anyone and that they want to see blood, which is a really stark difference. However, Kyros, his sort of beast-like brutality gives him an immense fighting ability, and King Riku allows Kyros a chance to go on parole if he can win 100 matches, and if he does, he will earn his freedom. And over the course of the years, Kyros continues to win without ever being defeated. Even after he's won more than enough matches to earn his freedom, he continues to fight because in reality, he feels guilty for murdering those men, and he wants to be forgotten by everyone, ironically, given what happens to him later on. And as I mentioned in the differences section, the manga has a couple panels of people mentioning that Kyros is fighting warriors from overseas, giants, and fish people, and beating them all, which is completely omitted from the anime for some reason. I have no idea why this was taken out, as it's literally just dialogue of the crowd talking. It takes like 5 seconds, but I feel this was important to convey just how strong and special Kyros actually was. He wasn't just beating up on the same people in Dressrosa over and over. He was doing it against warriors that were actually strong from other parts of the world, and especially giants and fish people. Like, he was capable of beating these like immensely strong beings. And it gives a better idea of just how strong Kyros is. And I feel that the anime really doesn't convey just how strong Kyros is as a warrior compared to the anime, because these pieces of dialogue are missing. And for like seemingly no reason either. It's almost like they just forgot. Kyros, though, with the help and support of King Riku, has kind of grown past his aggressive ways a little bit, and more importantly, his grief and guilt over killing the two people that killed his best friend, and has been made the commander of Riku's army. This, combined with his incredible record in the Colosseum, has completely changed his reputation among the citizens of Dressrosa, except for one person, Princess Scarlet, who Kyros has been tasked with protecting along with her sister Princess Viola. She doesn't trust him nor believe he's worthy of being forgiven, but despite Viola standing right there, pretty much able to tell her whether he really is a good person now or not with her Giro Giro powers, she doesn't let her tell her because she's kind of still in denial about that. But sometime later, Scarlet is kidnapped by pirates and Kyros just jumps into the ocean after her and takes them all down, saving her. But one thing to note is that in the several men that he takes down, not once does he actually slash or mortally wound them. Most of them just get knocked back into something or get knocked out. And this is, of course, due to his immense guilt over killing. He's doing his best not to kill anyone going forward. And this also explains why he's so well versed in techniques to take down people non-lethally, which is what he then passes on down to his daughter Rebecca decades later. And I like this bit of continuity from his introduction all the way to who he is in the present day, and even in his offspring Rebecca. I think it's a really cool thread that connects all of this now, and there's a reason for where that all came from. Now, this incident would completely turn Scarlet's opinion of Kyros around, and she would begin to fall in love with him from here on out. And while a specific timeline is never given, one thing I will say is, I hope there's at least a 3-year gap between them meeting and the kidnapping incident, because Scarlet was 15 years old when they met, and Kyros was already 25 at that point. So, if this happened any sooner, it would be incredibly inappropriate. However, by the time they do make things official, it does seem like a good amount of time passes, and we do know that Scarlet is 25 by the time of her death. They do eventually get married, but due to Kyros' criminal history, a criminal and a princess being married would be looked upon very unfavorably by the society at large, so they're forced to get married in secret, with King Riku making it look like Scarlet passed away from a disease to allow them to live on the outskirts of the city on their own. Eventually, Rebecca is born, and while Kyros still believes in his mind that his bloodied hands are not worthy of holding something so pure as Rebecca, that he puts on gloves every time he touches her, which I think is really sad, but also kind of cute. I love that little callback to Arabasta, again, kind of these two arcs paralleling each other. You know, Dressrosa, where we see the king, he's seen sneaking around with sort of the Japanese style thief mask to see, you know, their children, or in this case, grandchildren, as we see King Riku wear that mask and sneak out to see Rebecca, while King Cobra and Igaram in Arabasta wear those same style of disguises to sneak around to keep tabs on Vivi while she is hanging out with Koza and the Snusnagan. And so I love that little parallel. And they even call Scarlet even calls out the fact that that he should stop wearing that mask because it's not fooling anyone. Kind of like how in Arabasta, Toto saw right through Cobra's disguise as he was walking around with a little palm leaf over his head. Things look like they are going great, and everyone is happy, but of course, as in all One Piece flashbacks, those good times are very short-lived, as the fateful night will happen, and this time we finally get to see the last piece of the puzzle, as we've already seen that night from Rebecca's point of view and Riku's as well, but we have yet to see it from Kyros' point of view. And seeing the mayhem in the city, Kyros, of course, goes into town to save his home and the man that saved his life. But by the time he gets there, the palace has already been taken over by Doflamingo. Kyros is then chained by his left leg with sea stone, of all things, but without hesitation, he cuts off his chained leg to attack Doflamingo, but he's immediately turned into a toy soldier by Sugar. And even in his toy soldier state, he still manages to save Riku and get him out of the castle, but of course, no one can remember him anymore. But because of that, Scarlet no longer remembers his words and why she was waiting at the flower garden, which is why she went back into the city for food for Rebecca and was ultimately killed by Diamante. And this moment is so insanely heartbreaking for Kyros and us, the audience. He had to watch the love of his life die in his arms while she had no memory of him or their life together, unable to even feel the warmth of her body leaving her dying corpse. This was such an unbelievably cruel way to lose your loved one. Scarlet died with no memory of him, and she'll never even get that chance to get it back, even if Sugar is defeated. But not only that, Kyros has been through so much, shouldering all of this responsibility and grief in the 10 years leading up to the present, and you can't help but feel really bad for him. Like, Kyros is an amazing character. He's not all that deep or complex of a character, but there's enough there. He's clearly someone who has had a very rough life growing up and had a lot of pent-up rage as a result of that upbringing. But deep down, he is a good person at heart, and King Riku somehow saw that in him. Why or how he saw that is not entirely clear to me. I always got the sense that maybe he saw a lot of himself in his youth and wanted to give this kid a chance at a better life. And he was right, because he clearly was a good person, as he did feel guilt for his crimes and carries that with him always. Even as the world has forgiven him, he can't forgive himself, as he won't touch Rebecca with his self-proclaimed blood-soaked hands without ever wearing gloves first. And he is immensely strong without any sort of powers, and he doesn't even appear to be using haki either. He is just a crazy strong human, sort of like Zoro. He's a man that will forever live his life in atonement for his past crimes, and uses that and his strength to help others going forward. Kind of very similar to Kenshin, which makes sense, as Oda used to be an assistant to Nobuhiro Watsuki, who is the controversial author of Rurouni Kenshin. And so that's where he kind of got his start in professional manga writing and all of that, as an assistant to him on that series. So I can see a lot of Kenshin in Kyros. Back in the present, things have gotten really desperate, with Frankie being beaten by the Marines and Dellinger, Gladius and the squad of troops heading straight for Luffy, Viola, and Kyros, while Rebecca is being psychologically tortured by Diamante in the Colosseum. It's all on Usopp to somehow come through for everyone. However, one development that really started to get me insanely hyped was the perspective of all the toys who are enslaved just outside the tower where Usopp is fighting Trouble and Sugar. You can hear their thoughts as they start to root for Usopp as their savior, with even guys like Cavendish and Hyrodin basically pledging themselves to Usopp if the Straw Hats can somehow miraculously set them all free. And you could tell Oda was laying the groundwork for something huge, like a groundswell of support in the favor of the Straw Hats and Usopp's legend about to grow. But the question remained, how the hell is Usopp going to beat these two? And as we see, Usopp has been bound by Treble's snot and beaten to a pulp, with Sugar finishing him off by throwing the Tabasco grape shot in his mouth. But amazingly, this turns out to be her undoing, as Usopp's reaction to swallowing this is absurd and shocking, that so much so that she passes out with a terrified facial reaction, very similar to what Usopp did to Perona back in Thriller Bark. And so yeah, he does it. He did it. And this is a monumental win, and the episode and the chapter ends here, and we won't get to see the aftermath of this till the next episode. And so yeah, this was definitely an awesome moment, but before we close this episode, I kind of have to talk about this moment and the method Oda uses to defeat Sugar, because it's controversial to say the least. My reaction to this when I first read it back in, 2014, was that I did find it hilarious and a fun callback to Perona, but at the same time, I was a little disappointed that Oda decided to make one of, if not the most pivotal moment of the Dressrosa arc, hinge on an absurdly ridiculous gag. Don't get me wrong, I love everything involving Usopp that happens in the rest of the arc, but everything leading up to this was kind of, very unsatisfying. And this moment itself is kind of up in the air for me as well. Like, I don't mind that Oda used a gag joke to take out Sugar in and of itself, but it wasn't all that satisfying because Usopp himself really didn't do anything. The reason I don't outright hate this moment is because I think the real victory and show of Usopp's character is not in the fact that he defeats Sugar, but it was actually the fact that he came back to fight them and tried to be the hero everyone needed him to be, despite in his mind knowing that there was no way in hell he was beating 2 executive members. And his courage in the face of certain death was his real victory and his true test of his character. However, that being said, it does seem like Oda either couldn't come up with a better way to defeat Sugar, or wrote this absurd way to begin with. And I get that Usopp has this shocking, over-the-top reaction to eating the Tabasco ball, but why does that knock out Sugar? Like, there's no real explanation for this other than it scared her. It seems like really lazy writing to me. And it's not something I accuse Oda of doing that much, but this really does seem like he just had no way to figure out how to get out of this. And I think I just wanted Usopp to have a little bit more agency in defeating Sugar. The way he kind of defeated Perona is probably the best way, where he had an active strategy to beat her. But with Sugar, it was almost pure dumb luck. And maybe that was what Oda intended to have, to have sort of, and you'll see this, and I don't mean this to be spoilers, but you'll see that each executive member's downfall is all mostly due to their own hubris, because there is kind of a theme to each of their defeats, but this is just too much in my opinion. All in all, I don't have as big as a problem with this moment as some people do. It is stupid and kind of lazy, but I think it's still in keeping with Usopp's character. But I just wanted more, especially considering how frustrating Usopp was leading up to this moment. But all that being said, I still laugh my ass off when I read this or watch this, and even to this day, I still find it funny. And it's even funnier in the anime with the comedically over-the-top scream by Kappei Yamaguchi. Like, his scream, it still makes me laugh. It's so good. And so, yeah, I do find it a little unsatisfying and kind of lazy, but I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear what everybody else's thoughts are on this one, because it is, I do feel like there are people that really like this direction that this fight took, and then there are people that think that like this was very unsatisfying, or they sometimes even outright hate it, which I wouldn't go as far as to say I hate it. Like, it's not bad. It's just kind of weird and unsatisfying. But regardless of how it was accomplished, Usopp did it. He was successfully able to knock out Sugar, which is sure to cause a massive amount of chaos with everyone returning to humans and everyone else's memories come flooding back, changing the tide of the combat and conflict in a massive way. And we will get into that in the next episode. So yeah, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram at SunnyGoPodcast for updates of when I post new episodes, or to see pictures of my manga collection and card collection. And like I always say, just listening to the podcast is enough for me. But if you feel like extra supporting me, check out my Buy Me a Coffee profile. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to the podcast. Small spoiler section. There's just one thing I wanted to mention, because there is something I mentioned that if you've seen past this point and finished the Dressrosa arc, you will kind of note how I mistakenly said something, but I said that on purpose because I didn't want to spoil it. So I'm going to talk about it a little bit in the spoiler section. So yeah, I'm not clueless as to why I said that, but you'll see the explanation of why I said that in the spoiler section. But anyways, if you're not interested in that, I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. All right, so spoiler section. So obviously the thing I wanted to talk about and that I was trying to like avoid saying in the non-spoiler section is the fact that Treble's Beta Beta no Mi is not a Logia fruit, but because up until it's not, we're all meant to assume that it is, because he keeps using it like a Logia fruit. And yeah, so obviously we learn by, what is it, like chapter 780 something, a few more chapters down the line, when Treble is actually defeated, we learn that his fruit is actually a Paramecia fruit, and the reason why it seems like he is a Logia fruit is that he just covers himself in so much snot that no matter what you hit him, it always just passes through, and he's like this really thin, scrawny guy. And so, like, he has a very small, like, target area where you can actually hit him, and he just kind of moves himself in it. But one thing about this particular moment where Usopp cuts him into 3 pieces with his shurikens is I don't understand how that works, because he bisected him in 2 spots. So where was he supposed to hide? This part really confuses me too. especially the way it's depicted in the manga or the anime. The manga makes it a little bit more obscure because it doesn't quite show him being cut, but in the anime, it is as clear as day. He gets cut into 3 separate pieces across the center, like horizontally. So, like, by all accounts, Treble should have been sliced in half, or at least sustained some sort of slashing damage from that. But in any case, yeah. So from here on out, I will be calling it or referring to it as a Logia fruit until it's proven not, because to us, the viewers, at least to me at that point, I was convinced that it was a Logia fruit, so I don't want to ruin that for other people. And so yeah, it's definitely interesting how he uses that fruit, and I almost get the sense like maybe Oda wanted it to be a Logia fruit to begin with, but then changed his mind by the time he got to the point where the Treble would be defeated. It's actually almost exactly what he did with Katakuri. Like, so with Katakuri, like in Whole Cake Island, he was actually introduced as a Logia fruit user. Like when Jinbei actually tells everyone about Katakuri and his powers, he specifically refers to it as a Logia fruit in the manga or in the Shonen Jump magazine chapter release. And then it was then later edited and changed when it got to the Tankobon volume releases. And the dialogue was actually edited to say that he was a special paramecia fruit. And so I feel like the same thing happened here, where maybe initially he was actually intending Treble to be a Logia fruit user, but then changed his mind because either he couldn't figure out how to defeat him, or he felt it was more satisfying to not have him be a Logia fruit user, and he changed it. And similarly with Katakuri, like he did the same thing later on in Whole Cake Island. And so, yeah, I find that interesting. But yeah, so that's kind of why I'm dancing around the fact that in the non-spoiler section, I keep referring to the Beta Petonomi as a Logia fruit instead of a paramecia. Don't worry, I know it's a paramecia. But yeah, but just to keep up the non-spoiler aspect of it, I'm going to continue referring to it as a Logia fruit until it becomes obvious that it's not. But anyways, that's kind of really all I wanted to talk about. But yeah, hope you enjoyed that, and see you in the next episode. See ya.